All right, guys, so at this point, the United States has entered the war after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Okay, so we're going to see General George Marshall. Again, not super important that you write this specific down. But again, early on, George Marshall is going to kind of see the need to kind of increase manpower and funding as far as kind of rearming and building up the military of the United States. Okay, so remember, we kind of practiced this policy of disarmament after World War I to kind of ease the tensions with other countries. Okay, so now General George Marshall, he's going to believe in kind of the opposite, in that we need to rebuild the army leading into our entry into the war. Okay, so we're going to talk about kind of how do we mobilize or get ready for war. Okay, very similar. And again, guys, a lot of this stuff is going to be a repeat of what we've talked about in World War I, so it should sound either very similar or almost identical to the process that we took while entering World War I. Okay, women in the war effort, again, very similar thing, especially when the draft begins. Women have to take over jobs for the servicemen who leave to go to war. So whether that was on a volunteer basis or because of the draft, industries begin needing women to kind of fulfill those jobs. Okay, we're also going to see a little bit different than World War I. Women are going to participate in the military. Okay, kind of the consequences of this is going to alter family life. Okay, now again, remember when we talked about kind of the idea of the cult of domesticity, women typically stayed home and their main kind of career was taking care of the children. So now this is kind of shifting the way family life was in the time period, and it could have some negative consequences as well. Okay, remember we talked about the use of propaganda. So again, this is calling for women to kind of volunteer and take jobs in industries, and it kind of lists what women were needed to do during this time. Okay, you probably most definitely have seen this figure before. Okay, this is known as Rosie the Riveter. Okay, this becomes a symbol of the working women during the war. Okay, so again, it's based on the real person. Main thing you need to know is kind of what this image is and what it stands for. Okay, so again, kind of encouraging women to take those jobs in factories during the war. Okay, so like we talked about, women also participate in the military. Okay, now again, women are not taking place in combat duties at this point, but they are taking a much stronger kind of leadership role and participation directly through the military. Okay, so we're going to talk about a couple different organizations. Okay, the first one is WACS, or the Women's Army Corps. Okay, so this is the branch of the Army that allowed women to come into it. Okay, so again, they're doing non-combat duties, delivering mail, clerical work, all different types of things like that. Waves, super easy to remember. So waves, where do you find waves? On the ocean. This is going to be the naval program. Okay, women accepted for voluntary emergency service. So again, this is just like the WACS, but this is going through the branch of the Navy. Okay, they did not serve in Europe. They were still participating within the United States. Nurses, clerical work, communications, again, very similar to World War I, but they are working directly for the Navy. So we see more direct involvement with women participating in the military. Okay, easy way to remember this. What do WASPs do? WASPs fly. So this is the Women's Air Force Service pilots. Again, non-combat duties, but these were going to be female pilots. And this kind of allowed them to do things that were maybe seen as less important, like different tasks that freed up other male pilots to fight in combat. Okay, so that allowed more male pilots to fight in combat, and that took care of some of that work. Okay, really cool picture, some of the surviving WASPs. Okay, we're given the Congressional Gold Medal by Barack Obama. So that's a huge honor for those women who served in the Air Force during World War II. Okay, Office of War Information. We saw this very similar in World War I. Okay, so this is going to be office that's organizing the propaganda, the different ways that you could volunteer, support the war cause, Again, the main thing is to kind of promote that idea of patriotism and to support the country. Join the war effort, volunteer, donate money, all sorts of ways. So just like Hitler used propaganda to kind of promote his agenda, the United States is doing the same type of thing. So propaganda is going to be huge during World War II on all sides. Okay, so again, different ones. Very similar. Remember, we painted Germans to be evil in propaganda during World War I. You're going to see that again with Germans, and then both with the Japanese, particularly after Pearl Harbor. So again, you see kind of a dramatic Uncle Sam targeting the Japanese. And then this one is going to be anti-Nazi propaganda. Okay, War Production Board, again, exactly like it sounds. And again, very similar organization to what we saw during World War I. This wants to make sure, again, we need to be in full gear, okay, producing things for the military. Now, this is what's going to help under FDR's presidency. This is kind of what helps to pull the United States out of the Great Depression. We talked about it a little bit at the end of Unit 5. But again, this allows kind of smooth production, guaranteeing the military that has everything that they need, and gearing everything up towards kind of that war material. And then if you look down here, it's one of my kind of favorite, one of my favorite propaganda. When you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. Here's a little ghost image of Hitler. And it's basically saying conserve your resources, conserve the oil and gasoline that would used to, driving by yourself. Lord have mercy. And if you weren't car sharing, you were basically supporting Hitler. So again, dramatic piece, but that's what propaganda is for. Again, you don't have to write this down, but when we talk about like the War Production Board, again, they're taking different factories and turning them into kind of war production. So we see this is one of Ford's factories able to produce these B-24 bombers. War bonds, we talked about these in World War I with Liberty bonds. Again, temporary loan to the government helps finance the war. So remember kind of the motivation for people to buy a war bond, other than helping in the war, they usually had a good return on interest rates. Okay, so people would help with propaganda. Celebrities would get behind it to kind of encourage people to do it as well. Okay, another way is with food. Okay, so with rationing, growing your own food, you would get sort of what we talk about like with like a food stamp card, and depending on how many people you had in your family would depend on how much food that you could get depending on what the product was. So meat, butter, coffee, even the selling of shoes, anything that, could be rationed was rationed at this point. We talk about even rubber, like we said, gasoline, all of that works. So you have kind of like a stamps and point system when you went to a grocery store. But we also see kind of black market people would sell their stamps or sell goods to try to get around the system. So here's kind of what the stamps would look like. Okay, depending on the different types of material or groceries that you needed. Okay, another way to help with the rationing is with the Victory Garden. So instead of buying things, you are encouraged to grow your own fruits and vegetables. Okay, any way that you can kind of alleviate these food shortages, especially because, guys, remember, we're still in the tail end of the Great Depression. We are still struggling, and we were struggling before this, and we need to make sure that our soldiers are being taken care of. So the government is really encouraging any food that you can grow on your own. Do that. Okay, another way that the U.S. government kind of aided in the labor shortages was they asked that laborers cross the border from Mexico, and they were brought into California to do farm work. This was a nationwide program. They would also work on things like the railroads. But when we brought these people in, there was a lot of criticism towards that, and also kind of racism and prejudice to those people brought in. But this is one way that the government sought to kind of make sure that we had enough laborers, farmers, and so on while soldiers were away at war. Again, when these soldiers come back, this is going to cause increased competition for jobs and kind of tension between the members of the Bracero program and these soldiers returning to work.